Today, you're going to hear me talk with Pat Dillon about the nationally and globally critical issue of agricultural law, also known as ag law. Pat's going to talk about how John Deere is fighting back against Russia in the war with Ukraine, the practical explanation of why there's a rule against perpetuities, and also how family farms can create family drama. All this and more is coming up on today's episode of the Justice Podcast. Everybody wants to talk, but nobody wants to listen. So here's my petition. Instead of division, let's make our mission to change the system. Learn how the world works. Learn how we can act. Welcome, everybody, to the Justice Podcast. If you could give the audience just a quick intro of why you're qualified to talk about agriculture.
Well, I am a lawyer to support a farming habit. I'm raised on a multidisciplinary farm in Northeast Iowa. We had grade B dairy, and we had livestock, beef cattle, sheep, corn, hay, did all that kind of stuff as a kid. My undergraduate is in agricultural studies or farm operation from Iowa State. Following that, I spent time on active duty in the Army as a transportation officer. And following that, I went back to law school at Drake University in Des Moines, where they've got one of the preeminent ag law programs. It's got a lot of good history behind it. It's been around for a long time. It's supported by a number of the producer groups, and also some of the more policy-driven environmental type folks are involved with it. I'm the immediate past president of the American Agricultural Law Association, which is a organization which covers the United States and has some members from outside the United States. And it is like the Yugoslavia of agriculture. We have all sorts of different interests competing in their food law, policy, taxation folks, water law. So I've been exposed to a wide variety of disciplines within the big umbrella that is agriculture, as far as from a legal perspective. And I still farm today with my brother.
And what kind of farming are you doing now?
So grain, it's corn and soybeans. He has a cow-calf operation with my dad, but I only have so many hours in the day, so I'm not involved in that piece of it directly. I moved the round baler this weekend for him, but I wouldn't say that I'm involved in that portion of the operation.
And is farming something that's been in your family for generations, or how long has that been going on?
Yeah, Bartholomew Dillon came over on the Lena from Ireland in 1850 whatever, and he had a pretty successful run. He split his farm into two operations, and my side had one, and the other boy out of that family sold his and moved to California, and as a doctor, probably smarter of the branches, I guess, but we stuck around. My great grandfather had a rough go in the Depression, but still managed to infect his sons with farming disease, and so my grandfather had a farm that we're living on now, and then my great uncles ran it for a while, and so yeah, I've been farming since I was a little kid. I had a break when I was in the Army. I got to rest up for a while, but even then, I sought out agriculture, and like for fun, I would take my Blue Heeler Border Collie mixed dog and go to a herding school and like chase sheep on the weekends for fun. So I guess I'm pretty damaged goods in that respect. So
I love that. That is so American. I just love it. Like that's that's amazing. So was it always like, did you always know this is what I'm going to do? I'm going to work in agriculture when I grow up?
So I think there's that rebellious time when you're a teenager where like you're going to, go do something else and be smart and cool because you know everything, right? But I figured out that my parents made just enough money that I was not going to get any student aid. And I saw my older brother was going through the ROTC program at Iowa State, and I'm like, there's some money. So I got skinny and joined ROTC and got a competitive scholarship there, and that paid for undergraduate. But even then, knowing I was going to go on active duty and I could do anything I wanted to do, I started to realize I wanted to have my kids that I had envisioned in my head. I wanted them raised back in Northeast Iowa on a farm. Again, short aside, we were out running. The battalion officers were all out running. It's 27 of us, and I had told my boss that I'm gonna get out. I'm gonna go to law school. And Colonel McKenna said, "Lieutenant Dillon, why are you going back to Northeast Iowa?" And another one of the lieutenants, who's not a close buddy, but knew me well enough. He's like, "He's not going to tell you, sir. He's afraid you're going to follow him." So it's just, yeah. So it's been a long-term goal. I wanted to couple it with the law degree though, because I wanted, first of all, this being a lawyer is it's entertaining most days, and I like solving problems and fixing things, and I'm no good mechanically, so this is what I can do. And so they blend well together, that I can do the farm thing and I can still do something else with my noggin too. And it kind of, and also when I get old and decrepit, I can still be a lawyer, right? Versus at some point you can't do all the physical things for farming. So
Totally. I get that. I'm not even 30 yet, and I feel old and decrepit sometimes.
I should have said more old and decrepit. You're right.
Can you tell me a little more about the American Ag Law Society? I mean, it seems like so many different factors are coming in. How do you even have a discussion without just it being hours and hours and hours?
So yeah, it's tough to meet all the needs of our members. But we seem to get it done. We have an annual symposium where the association hosts an event for continuing legal education. And then we bring in lawyers who practice in the different areas, and they provide information in panels. Then additionally, we have listserv groups. It's like people are swapping back information. And then we have a resource library, like, oh, here's all the stuff on magic cookies that people are making in their basements in New York about what are the regulations on food prepped in a home, like how do you sell that? Like, those are emerging issues. And then we offer webinars and people pick up the things they want. It's for my practice, I'll be totally honest with you, food law regulation and stuff is, I'm not that interested. I'm really not. But it's important. And there's the segment of the practice area that super important too. And I like safe food, so don't get me wrong, it's important, but just not, things that I'm going to do for my clients. On the other hand, like the banking regulation, how do you handle things for securing a loan for a producer? Something I never knew until I went to an Ag Law Association meeting was, here in Iowa, you get a mortgage on the real estate, and then you pledge a security agreement in your growing crop. Pretty simple. Whoever lends you the money, they've got priority on those things. How does it work with fruit trees? Like, does that go with the mortgage, or does it go with the person that gave you the money to operate the fruit harvesting operation? Like, what happens when somebody forecloses? Can the real estate people come in and cut the trees down and turn it into a subdevelopment, or do the operating people get to say, no, we got to at least harvest the fruit off of it? So we get exposed to that kind of stuff. And then we have some general sessions where everybody's in the room together. And so not only the technical things, but like the long-term policy things, like where does ag fit in the nation's policies? Cheap food is a political weapon, right? That carries, it's got a diplomatic component to it, that, oh, we've got this cheap food and here's going to come in giant bags labeled USA. Here you go, country in need. Oh, by the way, we're the ones who brought that. Well, how does the government have access to that? Well, they have it because our food policies. We talk about regulation on insurance and crop insurance, and how that's got quite a bit of government entanglement in it, and how the programs to reward behaviors like conservation behaviors or disincentivize non-conservatory practices like farming up and down hillsides, this way instead of, with the contour. Those are all things that we look at, and we do find things that overlap. I'm not that interested in water use law because I'm in Iowa and there's a lot of it. And it's really more about putting drain tile in and making it go away. My friends in Texas are like, are you kidding me? You do what with the water? Yeah. And as things change and as people compete for limited resources, knowing kind of how Texas and the Western states deal with prior appropriation concepts of water, it's going to help me to understand if that kind of thing ever happens here in Iowa. I got some glimpse into that.
Yeah, so taking a step back to what you're talking about with crop insurance and other, these international and domestic policies, is that something that sounds really confusing? Like, how does a farmer navigate something like that?
Well, so I think farmers are highly technical and skilled operators. They watch the weather in Brazil, like they know, because they're tracking that soybean crop down there. They are keenly aware of what's going on in the Ukraine and the port blockades. Some other things that interesting things that we don't always think about. That John Deere apparently figured out that some of their product that was in Ukraine was pillaged and taken back to Russia, and they were able through satellite to disable it, right? Because of how the computers work. Well, that's things farmers need to be aware of, because you could probably apply that same concept to, oh, I missed a payment, now that I can't start my tractor, right? We're not there yet in the United States, but we're thinking, we're aware of those issues, like you can watch them. And so while the individual guy putting in 160 acres of corn on a Tuesday afternoon, may not have a active thought about, okay, I'm contributing to, a world stability effort because the corn I'm growing is going to do X, Y, Z. But they're aware that the market is, triggering them that, hey, there's not enough wheat available. Therefore, the price of corn is going to go up because it's a wheat substitute. That's going to trigger me to consider planting more corn versus soybeans. So I think they are aware of a lot of the things that go on. They just don't necessarily swim in the policy paper piece of it.
And can you describe a little bit more about how you've seen the industry evolve over time?
So at one point, farm operators used to say, I'm just a simple farmer, right? And you ask people in big towns, what is a farmer, right? Majority of them, if we don't know something, we replace it with what the media tells us farmers are. And in little kids' media, farmers wear straw hats and have a red barn and have 1 or 2 chickens and a super friendly cow and a dog, right? I would like to think that people don't think of farmers like that, but I'm afraid some of that still exists. So their role as they move forward has slowly been changed in people's mind's eye. There's a case in the 80s where the seed corn company had printed a bunch of terms of service, essentially a contract on the backside of the bag of seed, right? And one of those things was don't seed pirate, which means don't keep the seed. You can't use it next year. You're agreeing to plant it and harvest it and sell it, but you're not going to keep it back and try to plant it next year, right? For the genetics. And this farmer went ahead and did that because he wanted to. And when he got sued, one of his defenses, well, I'm just a simple farmer, right? I didn't know. I'm just out here being an agrarian. And the court's like, no, that is not the case, right? You're a skilled technical operator. The amount of data and things that farmers keep track of and farm operators keep track of is outstanding. Over the course of my changing my time here as a lawyer, which I guess I'm over 18 years here back practicing, I talk to families about who has access to the cell phone with all the contact information for the renters, right? And the landlords. And sad case, a friend of mine who's also in the American Ag Law Association, he talks about his brother's the farm operator, and he had a lot of data stored on his phone, and he died unexpectedly. And when he died, his phone stayed with his corpse until the autopsy was done. Well, no one knew how to get a hold of or do certain things because all that data was on the phone. So that's some of the changes we experience going through here. We also have a lot more pressure from off-farm heirs who have access to data and can say things like, well, I think mom and dad's farm's worth this much per acre because I read this, and I follow this guy on Twitter and I look at this guy's Reddit stream and blah, 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 blah. Versus at the beginning, a lot of times, they were limited to, I'm going to hire an appraiser and I'm going to look at what the Iowa State land value report was and hope for the best. So people are certainly becoming more information seeking and trying to make better decisions with more data points.
So given how complex it is and how really it sounds like it's impossible to be a simple farmer. I mean, can somebody just go and start a farm, or is that impossible these days?
So nothing's impossible with the right amount of capital and time and effort, right? The question is, where do you get those things and who's going to invest in it? When we talk about transitioning a farm from generation to generation, we talk first about establishing the skill set of, do I know how to perform basic maintenance? Can I calibrate a planter to plant with the right population? Can I do these things? Okay. The next step is, can I manage capital assets? Can I manage a feed yard of steers and look at them and check the feed and provide the medicine and watch them and market them at the appropriate time, right? And then once you get those things done, then you talk about transferring land and other big assets to the next generation. The entry to farming would be the same way. There's a guy on Twitter, used to be an NFL player, and he went back and he's like, I want to be a farmer, and I'm going to do it. And he just, of course, he's got his NFL salary, so bought some ground, bought some tractors, and away he goes. And he's entertaining to watch. And he's a speaker now too, but he had access to a lot of capital. Right. And the other barrier is getting access to land itself to do things. And the way people are overcoming that is moving away from the traditional, oh, he's got 360 acres and he plants row crops. There are a lot of entry-level farming operations that are, oh, I'm growing hops, I'm doing barley, or I'm doing hops for the customized breweries. I've got a client who owns, I think, 5 to 10 acres, and then he's got a bunch of vines growing up and down, and he grows the hops for the breweries. He's a farmer, maybe not your stereotypical corn seed cap wearing, drive around a 4x4 pickup farmer. He's a farmer. And then a lot of the smaller entry points, that's where a lot of people, if they're going to be coming in out cold, or they read a book and like, I'm going to do this, and I don't have any connections or any network of support, that's probably going to be where they can enter the market at and grow from there.
And speaking of networks, there is this idea of like family farm, you have everybody in the family, you're part of the farm. A lot of kids they don't want to stay with the business, and this happens with all sorts of family businesses. So what is the process of that like for a family who, they've had a family farm maybe for generations, and then all of a sudden the kids are going to California or elsewhere?
Right. So first of all, a lot of times it isn't that there's not enough for people to do. It's that there's too many people that want too little resource, right? A farm of 500 acres is only going to support so many families, right? So you got to find some way to diversify. Somebody wants to operate, maybe they've got to put up a confinement feeding operation that's less land intense and more labor intense, so they can have their piece of the puzzle. There's a power dynamic there about transferring the farm from one generation to the next. That's hard. And then there's also like you said, the interest. There are a lot less people in rural Iowa and the rural society, right? They are moving to cities, and with there comes the attraction of, different amenities, different things that they find for entertainment. And then the farm life doesn't look so glamorous. So for those who like to stay here, the problem is when the parents want to treat their kids fair. And I try to tell people fair is what happens the last week of July at the county or the third week of August down at the state fair. And you need to treat people equitably, like how they need to be treated. And there's a family component, and then there's a business succession component. If you've got one daughter who's stuck around and done the work and protected your equity as the senior generation, because she's the one who fed the cattle on the weekend, and then so you could go to the wedding, and she's the one who checks the waters and rewires them when they're bad. She's probably in a different position than your son who's finding themselves in Patagonia. Do they both get 50% of the farm? Well, okay, so fair. Okay, but what's equitable? Who did the work? Who needs that asset? Okay, is there something else that the son? This idea that we have to divide everything at our death. Other companies don't do that. Target does not reorganize and sell everything to each other every time a major shareholder dies, right? The farm operations do. Again, somebody from the Ag Law Association he's an ag economist, did a study, and they show the number of farms that fail if you make everybody rebuy all the assets every generation. So you got to kind of balance those things out. And then also the kids that want to leave, sometimes they're told to leave. Sometimes they're like, listen, there is no life for you here. We have, a mountain of debt. I don't see any way out of it, and you need to leave. Okay. Well, then it turns out they got a younger brother that hung around. And by the time that kid's in his teens, life's not so bad. We quit milking. And so now it's better. We got more time. And then we picked up the neighbor's farm renting. And the younger kid can farm. Okay. Well, the older kid's already left and become a banker or investment person. And, they're out of position, and they still think, the GPS is not used in farming, or they don't understand the current technology. So they're out and the young guy's in. And so there's all sorts of different ways these things play out. There's a want to be on the farm, and then sometimes they don't line up with the needs of the farm.
Oh, this is fascinating. I love this. Do you have an example of, not that you name any names, of course, but of somebody or a group of people who approached an agricultural legal problem poorly?
Mm-hmm. All sorts of it every day. I think a lot of times not understanding that dirt is different can cause problems, and dirt's what's behind your ears. Soil's what grows stuff in the ground, for all you agronomists listening. But it's just different, and people treat it differently. And when because they're not making any more of it. There's this history. Farm operators give directions to each other like, oh, well, I'm over by where the 6-bottom plow broke that year, or, oh, I'm up at Gracie's corner. Well, that doesn't mean anything to anybody else but to you, right? So when somebody wants to get an easement over your ground, or they want the kids, the off farm heirs want to force the sale, there's some differentials of, well, this is worth this much an acre, let's just sell it. Then, or well, this is just this little bit, it's no big deal. The farm operator has a very different view on that, and they also see it as a long-term investment. Like, I have been working for years to get this to stop eroding, and I've readjusted how I plant the field, so when I load corn off the field, the semi's straight down, it goes right on the highway, so it's safer. And now the neighbor that owns the building site that they got carved off of the ground, the neighbor is claiming that they own this triangular piece shape of ground, and that's going to screw everything up I've done for the last 10 years. You're right, I'm fighting it. And okay, yeah, it's only, it's 0.3 of an acre. It's, whatever it is, dollar figures, but that's not why I'm fighting. I'm ticked off because I've stopped the erosion. I've got things just the way I want it, and now you're going to upset. So I think those are examples of how, without understanding the full concept of things, it can hurt. I had a client very early on come over and talk to me, and he wanted to switch lawyers in the middle of a case, which generally it's a red flag. They tell you in law school. One of the few things they tell you about the practice of law in law school is clients who switch during the middle of cases are dangerous. And I said, well, I don't really know. And he's like, listen, we're fighting about who pays what expense between the landowner and the tenant. And when I said about the Roundup expense, and my lawyer said, I didn't know there were horses involved, because Roundup is a commonly used chemical, for grain production. He's like, that's when I knew I had the wrong lawyer. Like, I gotta go someplace else. So I think part of it is finding somebody who can speak your language. My wife's got a cousin who was briefly with an NFL team, and somebody's like, oh, are you going to look at his contract if he gets signed on? No, absolutely not. I don't know anything about that world, right? That's technically, I know how to do contracts because that's a lawyer thing. But sports contracts, it's a specialized industry. Like, so I think part of, to answer your question in a long-winded way, is people who don't use practitioners in the area that kind of know the feel and the whole, they're putting themselves at a disadvantage.
And so my last question would be, given what you know about the field, no pun intended, is there an area of law or like a specific law that you're like, this doesn't make sense? Like, why are we still doing this? It needs to be upgraded, but for whatever reason, it's still around.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that the world according to Pat would change. And I've been asked this question before, and my answer seems to vary depending on what I'm doing right now. I guess I'd like to say that instead of what law I don't want changed in Iowa, or what I don't want changed in Iowa, is one law I don't want changed, and that's the rule against perpetuities. Okay, that's a rule that drove people here in the United States from England because they couldn't get access to ground. Because in England, you can have a trust that lasts forever, right? And if you got a trust that lasts forever, they never have to sell the ground. And so you're always a tenant. That ground never comes up for sale. If you can't get ground in your name, you can't build wealth. That was one of the reasons people came over here, pilgrim hats aside. And so it's a commonly accepted principle in the United States that trusts have to die at some point. And essentially the short answer is, if you create a trust, it can only last for as long as there's a group of people that you name, as long as they're alive. When the last member of that group of people die, you got 21 years and the trust has to stop. Two neighboring states here, South Dakota and Wisconsin, have both gotten rid of that rule. They said, no, stuff can last forever. And they're doing that as a way to attract people to put trust and do legal work in their states. It's just like why South Dakota is on most of your credit card statements. If you look real close, it's because they have more relaxed usury laws on what interest rates they can charge in South Dakota. That's why those cards are out there. And that's fine for them. I understand why they're doing it. But the idea that I'm going to sit in a chair here with a client in 2022, and I'm going to write a trust, and I'm going to tell people in 2102 what they can do with stuff, right? And oh, by the way, not only that, but in 2150, you still have to follow whatever rules I have. I don't like that idea. I think, if people are connected to the same family and they continue to follow their own rules and they do, that's great. But the idea that there's going to be some dead hand control from that far, because we don't know what the future holds. If we go back and pull that Bartholomew Dillon off the boat and tell him that there's going to be electricity and it's going to be generated by solar and wind, and it's going to fight for market share with coal, and there's going to be absolutely no rail service. That's not the thing. Like that's going to be you're not even going to see that because it's going to be so consolidated, and people are going to drive everywhere. And oh, by the way, you're going to have devices that replace horses, and they're going to be guided by things that float around in the globe above the sky, and they give you a signal, and it drives, and you can shut off the individual rows of your planter as you go crossways across the field so that there's no overlap in the planting of the plants between the end rows and the long rows, he'd smack you.
Well, that was a great answer. All of your answers have been awesome. Pat, thank you so much for taking the time. This isn't financial, legal, or medical advice, but we do discuss how we might invest our resources for a healthier society. If you'd like to learn more about today's topic and other public policy issues, check out the website, thejusticepodcast.com.